This episode of Between the Levees is brought to you by Waterways Council, Incorporated, the national public policy organization that advocates for a modern, efficient, reliable, sustainable inland waterways transportation system. As WCI celebrates its 20th year, we serve the operators, shippers, growers, and producers, ports, skill-building trades, and conservation organizations that keep America and her key commodities moving on the inland system in the most environmentally friendly and safe way among surface transportation modes. To learn more about our important work and to join us, visit www.waterwayscouncil.org. Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Mr. Bud Osbourne. Spent 51 years in industry, is happily retired in the Pittsburgh area. He was brought to me by Mr. Stephen Roush 6 months ago from episode 20. Mr. Osbourne, 63 episodes later, I'm glad we could finally get this arranged.
Yes, me too.
Well, welcome to the show. These all begin the very same way. Sir, tell me, where were you born?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my father was with Union Barge Line, as was my grandfather, and in operations. And he had started out on steamer C.W. Talbot as a deckhand in 1932. And so I was kind of born into the industry.
Any good stories come to mind that he shared with you over the years about working on steamers?
Well, just little short things about you don't dare shine a light outside of the pilot house, or the pilot would come down out of there and whip you. And just nothing really stands out, at least not that I can repeat in polite company. So,
did your mother work?
No, she was a housewife.
How many siblings did you have?
Just one.
Okay.
Sister.
And I think I saw you were born in December of 46. Were any of your family involved in the war?
Yes, my dad, actually, after he failed the physical for the Army Air Corps, failed the physical for the Navy, he got my grandfather to pull some strings and get him into the Coast Guard. And of course, the Coast Guard was attached to the Navy in World War II. And Dad ended up as chief engineering officer on a destroyer escort on Atlantic convoy duty. So he saw a bit of action.
And was he back stateside when you were born?
Yes, he was.
So did he go directly into, you said, Union Barge Line?
Yes. He had been with Union Barge Line before the war, and then went back in after the war. And I think at that time, by the time I was born, I believe he was assistant operations manager.
All right. Well, tell me about your childhood.
Well, Dad bought a farm out in Washington County, about 25 miles west-southwest of Pittsburgh, and that's where I grew up. And we raised horses and hay and grain and whatnot. And I was very much into farming at that time, but Dad said, "No, you got to go to college, kid. That's all there is to it." So I went to college.
Speaking of, were you drawn to anything in school, from grade school to high school to what'd you do in college?
History and political science. I started out as a business major and just hated it. And, I wasn't real enthused about school in general, but Dad said, "No, you got to do this." So, and of course, by the time I got to my senior year, it was time to go back for my senior year. I'd gotten a taste of the river And, I told him, Dad, I'm done. I don't want to go back to school. I want to go back out on the steel trader. And, that's what I want to do. And so he tried logic and gentle persuasion, and I wasn't having anything of it. And he was a big guy. And he said, look, if you don't get in that car and go back out to Iowa, I'm going to kick your ass. So I got back in the car and went out to Iowa and finished my senior year. So, but shortly after that, I failed the Navy physical, and a week after that, I was on the Steel Courier southbound, and happier than a hog in slop.
During college, when were you introduced to the river officially?
Well, officially, 1970 is when I actually drew my first paycheck. Stood my first watch on a towboat. But I'd been on and off the boats for ever since I was a little kid. And my earliest recollection was, I don't know, I was probably about 4 years old and sitting on a lazy bench in the pilot house of the Reliance with Captain Charlie Biederman, and with a couple of other children of Union Barge Line employees, and Captain Biederman took us out for a ride just right there at Neville Island next to the landing, and we all thought that was pretty neat. And then anytime Dad was going to go to Neville Island, which was usually on a Saturday, I'd tag along and be climbing around on the boats and just really loving it.
Tell me about some of those experiences. I don't know how much you remember details about being 4 years old out there, but I guess what was your first impression of it? Were you drawn to it immediately?
Yes, I was. And probably when I was, I would say 8 or 10 years old, I was at home and bored and looking in my dad's library, and I saw this book called Towboat River, and I pulled it out and started to look at it, and I was instantly hooked again. It was just fascinating, and that's all I wanted to do really from then until I decided I wanted to be a farmer, and I wanted to be a farmer until I got started in college, and I wanted to play with cars for a living, and that never did quite pan out. So one year I came home from school for the summer, and Dad said, "What do you think you're going to do this summer?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess work on the farm." And he said, "No, I think we'll put you out on a towboat this summer." I said, "Sure, great." So I went down to the Union Hall and the National Maritime Union in Pittsburgh and signed up. And a week later, I was on the Steel Trader.
Now, was that 1970 or prior to that?
1970.
So you'd have
June.
been what, 23, 24 by then, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me about that first trip, stand and watch on that vessel.
Well, it was exciting. I loved it. It was a lot of getting up and going to work twice a day took some adjustment. Because I was used to sleeping a lot, and or sleeping, getting a full 8 or 10 hours of sleep, and that wasn't going to happen. But Leon Lyle was the mate, and he was a good guy, and I learned a lot from Leon. Bill Marco was the watchman, and he was a good guy, and really made sure I knew what to do and how to do it and was safe in doing it. And Howard Kelly was the other deckhand with me we were on the forward watch. And Howard was a pistol. He made my life as miserable as he could, but he was okay. He was a good guy. So I got introduced to the river old school. Through getting screamed at and abused, and and it was an eye opener.
Was that 6-hour watches?
Yes, yes.
And what kind of hitch?
30 days,
Okay.
day for day.
Well, tell me about that decking experience. Tell me about getting fussed at and what you were learning, and I guess also where were you all running, and how much were you shoving? What were you shoving?
Well, we took 15 loads of steel products, a lot of pipe, and a lot of coils, straight from Pittsburgh to New Orleans, and then we took empties up to Burnside and lay there a couple of days while they loaded 15 loads of Brazilian ore for us. And we headed back up with the ore all the way to Pittsburgh. And on other trips with OBL, we always had 15 loads both ways, up and down. But sometimes we'd stop at Cairo and they'd put another 10 on us, and we'd leave Cairo with 25. Of course, we're using 5,000 horsepower boats on the lower, but the way OBL did it back then, the same crew, except for the pilot, captain, and the chief engineer, they would stay on one boat, but the rest of the deck crew and the cook and the oiler would transfer to the other boat, when we'd turn. And so that way they kept the 5,000 horsepower boats on the lower and the 4,300 horsepower boats on the Ohio.
And how long were you on deck? I know you said you went to the engine room later.
Yeah, I decked for like a couple of years, and it was off and on, in the summers, and then finally after I finished college, I got a taste of decking in the winter, and it was rugged, but it was good. But I started having trouble with my knees because I'd had trouble with my knees since I was 12 years old. That's why I couldn't get in the Navy. So I talked, let's see, I talked Tom Marshall at Ohio Barge Line into letting me go in the engine room. And, because they were reluctant to keep me on deck when I started to have trouble with knees. And so they said, okay. And, that was a little bit easier on the knees. And I got some good experience with some really good engineers in the engine room, with Fairbanks OPs and the EMD 645 series. So that was good. And, then I decided maybe I should get a shoreside job, which was probably a mistake. I should have stayed on the boats until I got my license, but young and foolish. So Dad sent me out to see, well, several people in the industry at different barge lines, with Ohio River Company, Valley Line, Federal, and ACBL. And I walked into Jack Walford's office at ACBL, and he said, "Well, you ain't as big as your old man." I said, "Nope." And he said, "You got a college degree?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, you'd make a good barge man. So, so, so that's when I started with ACBL, and that was in January of '73, and they really had quite a training program lined up for me. It started out with a couple of weeks at Jeff Boat in the yard there with the ABS and Coast Guard inspectors, and learn how to put barges together. And then they sent me up to Chicago to work with Frank Smootnack. And I remember Jack Walford telling me, he said, when you're going up to work with Frank, you better get you a pair of track shoes to keep up with him. He doesn't stop for lunch. He doesn't stop for anything. And so I went up there and worked with Frank for, actually I worked 2 winters up there with Frank. And Frank said I was the only one that's stuck with him all winter. He said the rest of them, they quit. So, but I learned a lot from Frank about barges, about emergency damage control, and about keeping the cargo dry. Just got a real good education there with ACBL. So then they moved me up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that was good. That was I really enjoyed that. It was just great experience for me. I was more or less my own boss up there, and it really. I got to do a lot of stuff, and worked out real well for me. So, but when I was getting married, so I told Charlie Lehman, who was my boss, I said, Charlie, I think I need to be in one place year round. And so Alton it was, and it was okay, but it just didn't work out the way I'd hoped. And so I, left ACBL and finally ended up back in Pittsburgh, and with a little startup outfit called Gilco, General Intermodal Logistics Company. And what a zoo that was. So
Tell me about that.
well, it was a startup company, and they were trying to get started in a very depressed time in the industry. The industry was in a real tailspin by 1975. We had again overbuilt. There were too many barges competing for the same cargo, and a lot of the smaller companies went under during that time, 74, 75, 76. And, but fortunately in 1976, there was an opening at Union Meckling. My dad had retired a year or two before. So I was allowed to come to work at Draveau by then. So, that was excellent. I loved it. I thought the day I got hired at Draveau, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. And it was, a very well-run company, and excellent equipment, excellent personnel. It was terrific. Wish it would have lasted forever.
Well, how far along into your career was that then?
That was 1976. So I'd gotten with ACBL, I'd gotten extensive experience with emergency damage control and cargo transfer operations and laying out major repairs, and so it really set me up well for going with Union Meckling, because they needed somebody with that kind of experience, and I had it. So So I worked in, as a field service rep, which was, the same thing as ACBL's barge maintenance supervisors. So it was the same job basically at Union Meckling that I had at ACBL. Only I was a lot better prepared for it, and it was well, I loved it. It was great. And after a couple of years, they moved me into the office as maintenance coordinator and for dry cargo barges, and was in there for God, several years. Let's see, I guess I was in the office for about 5 or 6 years, and always in barge maintenance, and so then finally the industry was in the dumper again, and everybody's bleeding red ink, and next thing I know, they're moving Dervaux Meckling's entire headquarters to New Orleans, and I had just gotten married for the second time, with a ready-made family, just built a house, and I was in no position to move to New Orleans. And fortunately, they left me in Pittsburgh and left me with a job in Pittsburgh and in a company vehicle and everything, so I could hang on for a couple of months, and then I left Dervaux Meckling to start my own business, a marine survey business, and that was in 85, yeah, 85, 86, somewhere in there. I think 86, and managed to hang on long enough to get some business built up, and that was that. I managed to survive 30 years, well, through 2021 as a marine surveyor, and that's when I retired.
It's like about 35 years, all working for yourself.
Yes.
Tell me about that adventure.
Well, it was, it wasn't my first choice of occupations, but I loved doing it. But it was. I would much rather have had somebody else writing the paychecks. But it worked out all right, and I had some real good clients, and met a lot of good people, and I can't say really any of that 51 years was really negative. There were some lean times and some tough times, but like they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So yeah, it was all good.
You said you have 2 children?
Actually, I have 3. There's two stepchildren, and then one of the youngest is our own.
Has anybody followed you into the industry?
The youngest boy started out while he was in college. I got him a job with River Salvage, Jimmy Zubik, and he got a pretty good taste of it, and was doing pretty well. He's a good worker, and very. He doesn't wait around to be told to do something. He jumps in and does it if it needs to be done. And so Jimmy really liked him, but he decided he could make more money and have more fun if he went into the gas well industry. So he did that for a couple of years, and yeah, he made more money, but he always missed the river. And then he got married several years ago, and finally his wife's family said, "We need you to come work with us." So he did, and so he's building high-end custom homes. So he's doing pretty well with that.
Let's backtrack a few years here. Are there any stories you can share that might be questionable in today's world from your decking days?
Oh yeah, yeah. Probably more from my days as a barge man, but yeah, the decking. It was tough, and while safety was always a consideration, it wasn't obsessive. And I don't say that, I don't mean that in a negative way, but it wasn't obsessive like it is today. Uh, and we had more people. Well, we lost more people then, and had more severe injuries. So yeah, I don't remember deliberately doing anything dangerous while I was decking, but there were some times, but probably the surveyors and what we called back then bargemen, which was the people that were tasked with keep taking care of the barges, making sure they were in good order and getting repairs, and then doing the emergency damage controls and all that. We were doing things back then that they just would absolutely forbid us to do now, and not giving it a second thought. It was nothing to it. We always entered the rakes and boxes to look for fractures, from inside. It was the best way to do it. And, if it reeked of rotten grain, of course, no, we don't go in there. But no, we never gave it a second thought. And the same thing was, for dropping down in a wing tank to look for a leak. Yeah, we did it and didn't have the oxygen sensor or any of that. And of course, we always went in the hopper to check for fractures and check for holes in the covers, and never gave that a second thought. And I carried a rope ladder with me to get down in some of these box barges. But I remember Smootnack up in Chicago. He'd just throw a line down in there and get down the line, and then pull himself up with the line. And I did that a few times too. And now the ladder's going to work better. So yeah, we did that, and I can remember probably one of the times I came closest to dying. I'd gone up to, it was up around Clinton. Oh, it was up around Hannibal. One of our boats had done what they usually did on Friday afternoon, and they'd rubbed a bridge and knocked a hole in the barge. So, I loaded up a bunch of pumps and shingles and wedges and took off for Hannibal from Alton, and we got the barge stabilized, and I had my truck parked at the lock. I don't know, I don't remember which lock. It's been a long time since I've been on the upper, but I've been going full tilt since I got there, getting this barge stabilized, and so we had the pumps set out on the rake of the had my pumps set out on the rake of the barge, and we're in the lock, and So, while it was on the first cut, and while they were getting set to lock or to, lower the pool, I was transferring my 3-inch trash pumps off. They weighed just under 100 pounds. And, I put one foot up on the lock wall and the other foot on the barge and swing the pump over and hose. And it was getting into a rhythm. And deckhand there, his name was Travis Huckabee. He was the lead deckhand. And he was bringing the pumps over to me, and I'd pick them up and swing them up onto the lock wall. And in the last one, they had opened the valves in the lock, and the barge took a little surge and moved away from the lock. And I put my foot up there, and there was no lock wall under it. And fortunately, Travis was right there, and he grabbed me by the, under my arm and pulled me back. But if he hadn't been there, I'd have been right in the lock between the barge and the lock wall. So that was a good one.
Well, what's one of the craziest things you've witnessed out there over the years?
Oh, I don't know about crazy, but we just pulling barges off the dam at Gallipolis and at Emsworth, and where else? A couple of other places, dash yields. We had a few years, wasn't that many years back, we had an empty Pentadyne barge, which, Pentadyne's pretty nasty stuff. And they'd broken loose. I don't even remember where they'd broken loose, but the Pentadyne barge was down there hung up on dash yields. And, there wasn't quite enough water for it to go over the dam. And so we were there, kind of stuck waiting for some horsepower to pull it back off, and the river was falling. And, I had, by this time I was in business for myself and was representing, and had Jimmy Zubik down there with me, and Dick Davis was there, another surveyor representing, I don't remember who Dick was representing, one of the other barge lines. I guess they had been involved with the breakaway. And got talking with Jimmy, and we both agreed that probably the best bet is just to drag that barge right over the dam, catch it on the lower end. And because if we waited, the river would have dropped out a couple more feet, and the barge would really be hung up there. And so I told them what we wanted to do, and they were reluctant. And he said, "Okay, bud, but if this doesn't work, I'm going to come up here and kick your ass." "Okay, Carl, no problem. It'll work." So Jimmy got on the lower end with a couple of his boats, and they got a line on that thing and jerked on it a couple of times. It came over there just as pretty as you please. They dry docked the barge in Houston to check for damage, and other than a couple of claw marks, there was nothing. They didn't have to do any repairs or anything. So Carl didn't have to come to Pittsburgh and kick my ass.
Thankfully.
Yes.
Tell me about maybe some highlights of the trips from Pittsburgh to New Orleans that you made.
Well, I just love the towboats. They're big Draveau built boats. They were nearly new then, and just in great shape. And the pilots are really enthusiastic about them. They love the way they shoved and handled and steered back. It just did everything. And so that was nice. And the air conditioning worked great, and they had great cooks on those Ohio barge line boats. So we ate like kings. It was great, and good crews, real good crews. So I remember making deliveries once at Meade Johnson Terminal on the Ohio at Evansville, and we had to drop one or two and pick up the same number. And pilot just stuck the nose of the tow in there and moved that whole fleet around there at Meade Johnson to clear up our barges, jerk them out of there, and then set our drops in there just as pretty as you please. And we put everything back in position. But that was, there was no tug service. Back then we rarely had tug service. And nobody wanted to knock the boat out of tow and go pick up the barges, and it was a lot more convenient for everybody to just stick the nose of the tow in there and do our thing and be on our way. And back then we had the deck crews that knew how to handle a lock or a line, and could do all sorts of tricks flopping barges around. It was impressive.
Any specific scenery on that route that was especially memorable?
I love the Ohio River. It was just, it's just a beautiful river. And I wasn't real impressed with the lower. It was nothing but sand and trees and levees and, and mosquitoes. And when I remember the first time we had to double trip to, shove up through a tight spot. And of course I was the stern end man, in other words, least seniority. So I got to climb down the ladder and wade through all the mud and everything, go up the hill and find a good tree to tie half our tow off. And it was in the middle of the night. And man, I was just sure there was a big water moccasin waiting up there to eat me. I was not happy about that. But found a tree and got to drag the line up there, and mud up to my knees almost, it seemed like. And so that was one of my memories of working on the lower. The lower was never my favorite stretch.
Well, finally, sir, tell me a 51-year career with your father and grandfather. What has this industry meant to you and your family?
Well, it was, back then, back when I started, and really up through the 80s, it was sort of the last frontier. And we were rivals with the other companies, but when somebody got in a bind, you helped them out. It didn't matter whether they were the competition or not. You helped them out, did the best you could for them, and they did the same for you. And I miss that now. That doesn't happen as much anymore, and it's a shame. But that's the way it is. And it was everybody knew everybody pretty much in the industry. I knew the people at ACBL and Valley and we all helped each other. It was sort of more of a fraternity than an industry, and that's sadly lacking these days. And I don't, I understand why it's not that way anymore. And I don't expect it ever will be again. But it's just, it's sad that that's fading into history.
Well, any final comments or stories to share before we wrap this up?
Oh, I probably will think of several after we're done, but I can't think of any that that I can repeat in polite company.
Oh, what if you consider me impolite company?
Well, yes. Well, but other people are going to be watching this. So,
Well, sir, no, I think that'll do it for this one. Maybe we can do it again one day.
okay. All right. Very good.
All right, sir. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
All right.
Bye.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.